Did you know a king once literally turned human hands into money? It sounds like a horror story, but it really happened. One king's greed caused the death of up to 10 million people, all for profit. He never set foot in the land where it happened, yet he orchestrated one of history's darkest and deadliest schemes. How did he kill so many and almost get away with it? Stay tuned, because this true story is more shocking than anything you've heard. The tale begins in the late 1800s, during the Scramble for Africa. European powers were carving up the continent for colonies, and King Leopold II of Belgium wanted a slice of the cake, a very big slice. He presented himself as a kindly do-gooder, claiming he just wanted to civilize Central Africa and end the slave trade. Many in the world believed him. Why wouldn't they? A king speaking of philanthropy sounded convincing. By 1885, Leopold had used cunning diplomacy to gain personal control over a vast territory in the heart of Africa, the Congo Free State. This area was around 80 times larger than Belgium itself. To the world, he portrayed it as a humanitarian project. In reality, it was his private money machine. Leopold II now owned a country, literally as his personal property. He called himself the proprietor of the Congo Free State. Think about that. One man owning the lives and land of millions of people, answerable to no government or law except his own. And Leopold was hungry for wealth. He famously said, "There's nothing left for kings except money." The Congo was rich in resources like ivory and rubber, and Leopold intended to strip it bare. At first, ivory from elephant tusks was his big moneymaker, used for luxury goods like piano keys and jewelry. But then came the rubber boom in the 1890s. The world suddenly needed rubber for bicycle tires, car tires, and industrial equipment. Wild rubber vines grew abundantly in the Congo's rainforests. Leopold saw dollar signs. He had hit the jackpot. If he could force the locals to gather that rubber for him, and that's exactly what he did, with brutal efficiency. He created a slave labor system in everything but name. Villages were ordered to collect impossible quotas of wild rubber. How do you make people work themselves to death for you? Leopold's answer? Terror. His agents and private army, a 19,000-strong force called the Force Publique, turned the Congo into a nightmare. Soldiers would march into villages, seize the women and children as hostages, and demand the men go deep into the jungle to harvest rubber. Picture it. Armed soldiers rounding up mothers and kids, tying them up, threatening to kill them if the men didn't bring back enough rubber. Desperate to save their families, the men would scatter into the rainforest for days or weeks, scrambling to meet those insane quotas. Back in the villages, the captives often starved in cages while waiting. Men who collapsed from exhaustion were beaten mercilessly. Leopold's enforcers used a cruel whip called the chicotte, made of sun-dried hippopotamus hide. A chicotte beating could flay skin and break a person's spirit. 50 lashes of this whip could be fatal. This was daily life under Leopold's rule. Work or be whipped. Work or watch your loved ones suffer. But whippings were far from the worst of it. Failure to meet rubber quotas was punishable by death. And the methods of killing were designed to spread maximum fear. Soldiers burned entire villages to the ground as punishment for slacking. They would shoot down anyone who resisted or tried to flee. The officers in charge wanted to ensure their troops weren't wasting bullets. Bullets cost money, after all. So, they demanded proof for each bullet used, in the form of a severed human hand. Yes, you heard that right. For every shot fired, a soldier had to cut off a victim's hand and bring it as evidence. This led to baskets of severed hands piling up after raids. Some soldiers even hunted people just to collect hands when they didn't have enough, or cut the hands off living victims if they missed their shot, just to avoid their officers' anger. In this twisted system, human hands became a form of currency to account for bullets. It is as ghastly and surreal as it sounds, an atrocity almost beyond imagination. And it gets even worse. If a village still couldn't produce enough rubber, the soldiers' reprisal was unspeakably cruel. They might kill all the men, behead them, and mount their heads on the village palisades as a gruesome warning. Women and children were sometimes hanged on scaffolds in the shape of a cross. Other times, soldiers would drown prisoners en masse. There's an account of an officer stuffing 10 Congolese captives in a net, tying it shut with heavy stones, and tossing it into the river. Some captives were forced to watch their family members being killed or mutilated. There are stories of soldiers who forced young men to harm or kill their own relatives if the rubber wasn't forthcoming, a tactic to break the people's will through sheer horror. Villagers lived in constant terror, knowing that any sign of defiance or any shortfall in rubber could invite unimaginable brutality. One particularly haunting practice was to mutilate children as punishment. In some cases, hands and feet of children were cut off to send a message to their parents. Missionaries in the Congo recorded instances of small children with limbs severed by Leopold's agents. In one horrific photograph taken at the time, a father gazes at the severed hand and foot of his little daughter. The price paid because his village hadn't met its rubber quota. Can you imagine his anguish? That image brought the cruelty home to those who saw it, because it put a face on the suffering. It's the kind of picture that's hard to look at, and impossible to forget. The result of this all-out exploitation and violence was catastrophic. The population of the Congo plummeted. People weren't just being murdered outright. They were also dying from the hunger, exhaustion, and disease that came with the forced labor regime. With so many men forced to abandon farming to gather rubber, crops failed and famine struck many regions. Women hostages, tied up for weeks, often starved to death. Refugees fled deep into the forests to escape the rubber quotas, only to die there from lack of food and shelter. Diseases like smallpox and sleeping sickness swept through communities weakened by starvation and stress. And because so many were in hiding or too traumatized, birth rates fell sharply. Families couldn't even safely raise children in such chaos. In just about 20 years, from the 1880s to the early 1900s, the Congo's population may have been cut by half. It's estimated that around 10 million Congolese people died due to Leopold's greed, roughly half the population wiped out by murder, forced labor, starvation, and disease. 10 million lives. It's a number almost too large to grasp, a human catastrophe on par with the worst genocides in history. So how could this genocide go on for decades without the world intervening sooner? Part of the answer is that Leopold hid his crimes behind a veil of lies and secrecy. He had convinced the international community that he was a benevolent ruler in the Congo, spreading Christianity and ending slavery. In Europe and America, many people thought of Leopold as a great humanitarian at first. He forbade outsiders from freely roaming the Congo, so very few reports leaked out in the early years. His regime also silenced or discredited whistleblowers. Meanwhile, the flow of wealth, rubber and ivory, made many powerful people turn a blind eye. Out of sight, out of mind, Leopold hoped. For a while, it worked, but secrets don't last forever. Brave witnesses began to speak up. As early as 1890, a visitor to the Congo named George Washington Williams was so appalled by the brutality that he wrote an open letter calling it crimes against humanity. That was actually the first time anyone used the now famous phrase. It was invented to describe Leopold's Congo atrocities. Missionaries in the field, both African and Western, started reporting the mutilations and mass killings they saw. Their testimonies were often met with skepticism. After all, how could such barbarity be real in the modern world? But they persisted, gathering evidence. The breakthrough came from an ordinary shipping clerk in Europe named Edmond Dane Morel. Around 1900, Morel was working for a British company that managed cargo to and from the Congo. He noticed something strange. Ships arriving from the Congo were overflowing with rubber and ivory. But when the ships departed Europe for Congo, they carried no trade goods, only guns, bullets, and chains. Morel put two and two together. If the Congo was not importing goods to pay for all that rubber and ivory, it could mean only one thing: the resources were being taken by force, with no compensation except violence. He realized an enormous slave labor system was operating. Shocked and outraged, Morel became a whistleblower. He quit his job and dedicated himself to exposing Leopold's horror show. Morel began publishing articles and pamphlets detailing the abuses in the Congo. He worked with missionaries who smuggled out photographs of mutilated Congolese and eyewitness accounts that confirmed the nightmare. These revelations started a snowball of outrage. Newspapers around the world picked up the story. and the reputation of King Leopold II began to crumble. The question on everyone's lips was, how could this happen? How could one man cause so much suffering? Another key figure was Roger Casement, a British diplomat. The British government sent him to the Congo to investigate the alarming reports. In 1904, Casement delivered a scathing official report that confirmed everything: the forced labor, the whippings, the severed hands, the mass deaths. This Casement report validated Morel's claims with hard evidence, and it caused an international scandal. Suddenly, Leopold's secrets were laid bare for the world to see. Public opinion swung hard against King Leopold II. Human rights activists organized into the Congo Reform Association, one of the first large-scale human rights movements in history, to demand action. Famous writers joined the cause. Novelist Joseph Conrad had already immortalized the Congo's darkness in Heart of Darkness after witnessing it firsthand. And now, others like Mark Twain and Arthur Conan Doyle wrote fiery essays condemning Leopold's atrocities. The pressure kept building on the Belgian government and other nations to do something about the horror in the Congo. Leopold, for his part, fought tooth and nail to deny everything. He ran a brazen propaganda campaign, calling the accusations lies or a foreign plot to steal his colony. He even commissioned phony investigations to whitewash his regime. But the truth was too obvious by now. The images of emaciated villagers, children with missing hands, and testimonies of mass murder were impossible to refute. The king's wealth-soaked lies had finally unraveled. By 1908, the international outcry could not be ignored. Under tremendous pressure, the Belgian government finally stepped in and took the Congo away from Leopold. They annexed the territory, turning it into the Belgian Congo rather than King Leopold's personal estate. Leopold II's 23-year reign of terror had come to an end. The nightmare was over, or at least the worst of it was. Colonial exploitation in the Congo continued under Belgium, but the most heinous abuses were officially outlawed after 1908. It was a bittersweet change. The killing slowed, but only after millions were already dead and the country devastated. Leopold II was forced to relinquish his prize colony, but get this. He made sure he profited even in defeat. The Belgian state agreed to pay him a huge sum, essentially a golden handshake, to give up the Congo. Leopold walked away with the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money as compensation for losing his blood-soaked enterprise. Can you believe the gall of this guy? Even as a global pariah, he finagled a payout for his troubles. Before leaving, the king did one last terrible thing. He destroyed as many records as he could from the Congo Free State administration. He wanted to erase the evidence of his crimes. "I will give them my Congo," Leopold said, "but they have no right to know what I did there." Bonfires of official documents burned for days, turning years of secrets into ash. Of course, enough witnesses and records survived that history would remember anyway. Leopold II died a short time later, in 1909, unpunished by any court on earth. But his legacy would forever be stained with blood. For a long time in Belgium, his atrocities were downplayed. Incredibly, statues of Leopold still stood as if he were a great man. But as the truth spread, more people began to rightly call him one of history's worst killers. The ghosts of the Congo would not be silenced. So, what can we learn from this grim chapter of history? The story of King Leopold II and the Congo Free State is a chilling reminder of how far unchecked greed and power can go. It's a warning of what can happen when one man's profit matters more than millions of people's lives. This dark past also gave rise to some positive changes. It sparked early human rights activism and a new awareness of the phrase crimes against humanity. Even today, the Democratic Republic of Congo is still feeling the effects of the exploitation set in motion by Leopold over a century ago. Knowing this history matters. It's not just about condemning,